In 2013, a strange and at the same time scary situation occurred. A video appeared on the web. A young girl enters a hotel lift, chaotically presses buttons, then suddenly jumps out, waves her hands and hides in the corner in panic, as if she is running away from someone. At the last moment, she disappears from the frame. Her name was Eliza Lamb. This story wouldn't have got the hype it did if it hadn't been for one thing. She disappeared so fast it was like she vanished. The cameras didn't pick up anyone who might have taken her. And the best part is that this hotel has been the scene of dozens of murders, disappearances, the unexplained, and many other creepy things over the last 90 years. After a while, the hotel guests started complaining that the water from the tap was dark and had a bad taste, and also the pressure is very weak. At first, it did not alert anyone, but after a couple of days because of the continuing problem, the hotel employee decided to climb on the roof and check the water boilers. He goes to open the boiler and sees a body at the bottom. The police were called immediately and they started thinking, how did she get in there? The door on the roof is alarmed. You can't just walk in. The tank's 3 meters high. It's almost impossible to get in. And the creepy thing was that her clothes and stuff were inside, and she was completely naked. It's a gruesome picture. Was it murder? Think carefully. If it was murder, how did the killer get the body in unnoticed, and then manage to climb up on the tank and dump the body, then leave the hotel unnoticed? Or maybe the killer never left the hotel. In the end, nobody really knows what happened that night. The official version was put forward by the detectives, who didn't seem to know what was going on. They explained the situation as follows. Elise had mental problems, perhaps psychosis, and she herself climbed into the tank being insane and got into the water where she couldn't get out because of the slippery walls. The vanished Izuites. The Eskimo settlement that stood on the shores of Lake Angakuni in northern Canada was known for its hospitality. The locals were engaged in hunting and fishing. They were always there to warm and feed travelers. Joe LaBelle was making money in the fur trade, so he often visited the Inuit settlement. Here he could exchange prey with the local hunters and have a good time. On the 12th of November 1930, Joe was tired of hunting and decided to go to the settlement. He was in a hurry. He wanted to warm up and take a break. Joe was skiing, and as he approached the village, he shouted his usual greeting in the local language. But there was no response. Joe entered the settlement and again shouted the greeting, but again there was silence. Then he would see that the doors of one of the dwellings were open, and there was warm food on the table as if the owners were about to sit down to eat. He decided to walk around the settlement and did not meet a single person or animal. Everywhere was the same picture, an open door and warm food. The people living here could not just leave because it was already difficult to be in this harsh place. Even in the neighboring village, no one leaves lightly without at least bringing weapons and food. Joe also found no footprints on the ground. But couldn't the inhabitants have flown away? People aren't birds. Joe LaBelle was very frightened, so despite his fatigue, he left Anjakuni in a hurry to go to the nearest settlement where there was a communication center. On reaching the village, which was very near, he saw people and asked for the telegraph. The hunter informed the police about what he had seen. A few hours later, a whole squad of mounted police arrived at Anjakuni. On the way, the police were joined by 3 other hunters who had a good sense of the terrain. The police thoroughly searched the settlement, but the clues only served to confuse matters further. Firstly, many starved dogs were found a few hundred meters from the settlement, but the Inuit would never have allowed such a thing to happen. The hunters said the Anjakuni people would rather starve themselves than watch their dogs suffer for lack of food. And let it not be forgotten that there was ready food on the table or on the fire in every house, and there was more than enough to spare. Secondly, all the graves in the local cemetery had been dug up. The bodies of the deceased were missing, and the tombstones were stacked in rows. But the Inuit treated the dead with great care and could not have done such a thing. The theory that animals could have done it falls away. The most popular suggestion, however, was that of aliens. Local hunters reported that 2 days before Joe LaBelle's visit to Anjakuni, they had seen an unusual, luminous object in the sky from the forest, moving towards the lake. The Ghost of Madeleine McCann. 2007, Kate and Jerry McCann flew to Portugal for a holiday in the Algarve resort of Praia da Luz. It used to be a fishing village, but that time is long gone, and now it has one of the best beaches in the world. The water is always calm. There's a small picturesque town nearby and lots of tourists. They all checked in together on the first floor of an apartment in the 5 Arua Dr. Agostinho da Silva apartment block. It was the evening of the day when the parents put their 3-year-old daughter Madeleine and the younger twin children to bed. They went out for something to eat at a restaurant with some friends. Every few minutes, they checked on the children and whether they had woken Madeleine up. 21:05. That same evening, Madeleine McCann's father went into the room to see if his daughter was asleep. All appeared to be well. Madeleine was sleeping peacefully in her cot. There was one oddity, though. Jerry was sure he had left the bedroom door closed, but now it was wide open. Jerry decided that he had forgotten to cover it and went back into the restaurant. It was Kate's turn. She went to check on the kids at 10 p.m. Kate entered the apartment through the patio doors and noticed that the bedroom door was open again. And at that moment, any human would have realized that something was wrong here. The door was open wider than usual. Kate went to close the door, but it slammed shut with such force that the window almost flew out. Kate turned around and saw that the window was open wide, but she was pretty sure she'd closed it before she left. The twins were sleeping quietly in their room, and Kate quietly walked over to Madeline's cot and peered in. Cold sweat ran down her back, and a silence hung in the air. Madeline wasn't there, only her soft toy lying lonely on the pillow. Kate rushed to look for Madeline in all the apartments, and not finding her, she rushed to the restaurant to her husband. The search began, and Christian Bruckner, who is serving a sentence in Germany for sexual abuse of a young child, became a suspect. According to the data in 2007, Bruckner was hanging out in a Portuguese resort. His van was spotted near where the McCanns lived, but there's no direct evidence of his crime. Second theory, property consultant Robert Murat. At 9:15 p.m., he was heading towards his house with a child in his arms. However, the police found no evidence, and all the testimonies about him are at odds. Final version, the killers are Kate and Jerry. In the investigation, considered the version that Madeline died because of a dose of sleeping pills, which gave the child her mom and dad before leaving for the restaurant. And then, to hide the fact of poisoning, the parents invented a story about kidnapping the child. But in 2008, they were cleared as suspects. Madeline is still missing. Even the fact of her death has not yet been established. However, German investigators suggest that the girl is most likely no longer alive. An uncrewed airship, 1941, especially for the U.S. Navy, creates an airship under the L-8. Its main task is to fight against enemy submarines. Already on the 16th of August, the crew of the L-8 receives a mission from the base. It was necessary to fly over the ocean on a given route and return. The original plan was to have 3 people on board. The first pilot was Lieutenant Ernest Cody, the pilot was Midshipman Charles Adam, and the flight mechanic Riley Heel. But the L-8 was overloaded and Riley Heel was asked to stay on the ground. The pilots set off on their own for the mission. At exactly 6 a.m., the airship took to the air. The pilots kept in touch and reported that all was going well. 8 a.m., the airship detected a large, oily slick in the area of Farallon Island, off the coast of San Francisco, and reported that it was going to take a look at it. The airship traveled low to the water and used flare bombs to look at the slick. At the time, there was a freighter and several fishing boats there. Not an hour later, the L-8 gained altitude and headed back toward San Francisco without alerting the Shitabe. Headquarters immediately ordered the airship to be monitored, for the pilots did not communicate. The L-8 was proceeding through the air when it was spotted by 2 passenger planes, but then disappeared into thick clouds. 11 p.m., the airship reappeared in sight. Those observing it saw that the hull was visibly deformed. The airship then began a rapid descent for landing. The L-8's engines stopped working, and it became clear that no one was in control of the craft. The blimp landed near a golf course, so the police visited it but found no one. It was decided to check the shell itself, but it also turned out to be empty. The crew was gone, but all the belongings and parachutes were in place and the equipment was working properly, as if it had been just as empty 10 hours ago. An investigation was launched where various versions of the crew's disappearance were considered. One version was that Pilot 1 killed Pilot 2 and escaped, but all the doors were closed, so this version was discarded. In addition, both pilots were experienced and both had families. The investigation into the disappearance of the pilots reached a dead end. It wasn't until a year later that the deaths were made public.